Hello there, it's Tom here, and this is a late night look at Gunnerkrigg Court, Chapter 29, A Bad Start. So the chapter starts with Kat in her workshop, building a new body for Robot. And straight away we can see that she's not quite acting like she normally would. And this chapter was mainly to bring up something that Annie and Renard had hinted at a couple of chapters ago, where Kat seems to have started acting a bit callously and kind of standoffish. And she's been this way ever since the gang found the recording of Diego and what he was like when he was alive, and what he'd done in the past. And this has just led Kat to seem a bit despondent and behaving very negatively to the robots. Annie and Renard speculated that it was kind of a shock for Kat to discover that something that she was so obsessed about, like the robots, could have come from somebody who seemed basically like a monster in real life, like Diego. And without really knowing it, Kat's been lashing out at those around her. And as we can see here in particular, she's not being very friendly to the robots, despite them coming to try and help her with her plans and designs. Even the very mention of Diego's work causes Kat to declare all his work trash. But Kat's feeling sorry for herself is interrupted by this guy here, this crappy little bird here, which is actually a baby pigeon, but Kat has no idea what a baby pigeon looks like. Oh, and just another thing of note, one thing I enjoyed drawing in this chapter was Kat's workshop, which, like I've said before, was based on the work unit that my dad used to own. But we can see in the background that Kat's accumulated more machinery and made herself very much more at home here. And it was just kind of fun drawing a little workshop for Kat. And I like this place because it's a very familiar area for Kat to return to if she's doing any work. But anyway, back to this bird. Initially, Kat decides to leave it where it is, since it looks like the parents of the bird were keeping an eye on it from above. And while there is all sorts of advice you can get from various animal experts as to what you should do when finding a baby bird that is seemingly abandoned, Kat doesn't exactly know any of this, so what she decides to do is, when she realizes that it's been left on its own for a while, she decides to put it into a box and take it to Path. And we can see here how casually Kat just leaves Robot trapped in this desktop rig here, which is basically not able to do anything other than project his voice and move an arm around. It's just to show that she's not really giving much thought to the robots around her, even though one of the robots is her friend. So Kat arrives at this place where Path seems to be working, and one of the things I like about this chapter is that we get to see a bit more of Path, who was never intended to be a major character of the story, but I always do like finding an opportunity to spend a bit of time with some of the background characters. And in this case, it was just an opportunity to have Kat sort of interact with another person that wasn't Annie, or one of the regular gang. And I suppose this kind of ties into the feeling that I wanted with the comic, in that with the court being so large, many of the characters spend a lot of their time alone, and we can see that without Annie around, Kat is basically left alone to be working away in her workshop, tinkering about with nobody but the robots to talk to. And on the train journey to Path's place of work, we can see that there's nobody else on the train, and so Kat just openly talks out loud to herself and to the bird. And even when she does meet up with Path is here alone working in this sort of veterinary style clinic. And I like scenes like this where you do get to see some of the people come into contact with other people in the court. In the same way that Kat's workshop is very much a familiar place for Kat to go and work, and all the colours are very sort of coded to Kat and her character, we can see that this veterinary practice type place is coloured in greens and browns, a place where Path seems to just blend in with. And she even has a robot worker working here with her. And you can kind of imagine that she has had her own stories that take place in this area, and it's another familiar place that she probably likes to hang around. But anyway, we get this scene here where Kat in her blue jumpsuit walks in carrying this strange-looking blue bird, and she gets a chance to interact with one of her classmates. And they briefly mention that Annie's got a ton of detentions, since she's having to face some repercussion for the way that Annie herself has been acting in the past few chapters, tending to break the rules a bit more, and now having to pay for them a bit. And this is a chance for Kat to see a friend of hers showing her own skill and knowledge and putting her faith in them knowing what they're doing. Even being surprised that a robot is able to very delicately examine this tiny bird. And I guess just a side note here, before drawing all this stuff I looked up the proper procedures that you should take if you do find yourself having to look after a baby bird or take it somewhere. And so it was a chance to look up how people in a veterinary practice might feed a tiny bird like this. And I always find that part of the research quite interesting. And while Bobby the robot is feeding the pigeon, we have a chance to see a bit more of Path's workplace. And we see that she's keeping a ton of laboratory mice in the back room. And we get a sense that she comes here to sort of look after them and help out. But of course we see that the mice aren't just kept as pets. This is basically used as a breaking point for Kat. She's already been feeling down about the robots and their connection with Diego in the past. And now she hears that the court is keeping animals for various types of animal testing, and her initial reaction is to be very dismayed by it. The scene is basically to allow Kat to get everything off her chest and express the problems that she's been having lately and what she's been thinking about. And Path's role in this scene is just a counterpoint to all those ideas. As somebody who works in this place, she understands the need for her role in this particular facility. And as somebody who loves animals, she figures that the best place for her to be is here. And I guess the point that I was trying to make is that instead of throwing your hands up and being dissatisfied with the way things are, if you try and take part, then you can be sure that at least one person is trying to work for the better. And it could be seen as a trite point, but it's the kind of thing that Kat needed to hear. And rather than spelling everything out exactly what I was trying to get across in this section, I prefer to let the readers come to their own conclusion and take away what they want from this storyline. But in terms of the story, it was intended to sort of nudge Kat back in a different direction. And for this small scene here, which we'll see expanded upon a bit later in the comic. And so as evening sets in, Kat and Path finish up, and Kat heads back, and we find that Kat's cut her hair, just as a visual cue to see that she's back to normal now, and she's feeling a bit more like her old self. I guess the thing with Kat's personality is that she tends to let things get to her on a personal level, and we've seen this a few times in the past. But in this particular time, she had a chance to express some of her feelings with someone that she wouldn't normally talk to. And it was just that small look outside of herself that she needed to get her back on track. And Kat just brings Annie up to date. She does mention that they'll be going back to see the bird the next day, and while I would have loved to have spent a while showing the process of events whereby the three girls go and look after the bird until he's ready to fly off, it probably wouldn't have been very fitting in the comic itself. But it's definitely a time where the three of them, Annie, Kat and Path, came to know each other a bit more. And here right at the end, again, we see that Kat's basically returned to her old self. And even though she still can't use any of Diego's designs, she is not outright dismissing them anymore, and even considering that there might be one day where she could actually use them in the future. And that's the end of this chapter, and this is one of my favourite bonus pages. Not just because I enjoy writing things from the robot's perspective, but it was also a chance for me to illustrate a few different types of pigeon, and as everybody knows, pigeons are the best bird. And that's that, no discussion needed. So that's the end of this chapter. Come back again for chapter 30, The Coward Heart.